I never thought I'd be telling this story, but I suppose some experiences demand to be shared, if only as a warning to others. It began on December 15th, just 10 days before Christmas. I was dating Michael at the time, and despite our relationship hitting a rough patch, I was determined to make the holidays special. We'd been together for almost 2 years, and I thought the perfect gift might help bridge the growing distance between us. Michael had always been passionate about vintage cameras. He'd talk for hours about old Leicas and Rolleiflexes, showing me pictures in collectors' magazines and pointing out the ones he dreamed of owning. There was one particular model, 1956 Leica M3, that he considered the holy grail of cameras. He'd mentioned once that he'd seen one at an antique show years ago but couldn't afford it at the time. The memory of how his eyes lit up when he talked about it had stayed with me. So when I spotted a listing for that exact model on a local collectibles website, I felt like fate had handed me the perfect opportunity. The seller, David, lived just across town. He'd inherited the camera from his grandfather and was looking to sell it to someone who would appreciate its historical value. The price was steep, but I had some savings, and I convinced myself it would be worth it to see Michael's face on Christmas morning. I messaged David and arranged to meet him at a local coffee shop to see the camera. Looking back, I did everything right. Public place, daytime meeting. I even told my best friend Sarah where I was going. David turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 30s with wire-rimmed glasses and a genuine enthusiasm for vintage photography. He brought the camera in its original leather case, complete with documentation proving its authenticity. We spent almost 2 hours talking about cameras, photography, and his grandfather's collection. David was knowledgeable and passionate, reminding me a bit of Michael in the way he got excited explaining the camera's technical features. I found myself enjoying our conversation, and when he offered to show me some of his grandfather's other photography equipment at his home office, I didn't feel any alarm bells going off. That was my first mistake. David's house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people keep their lawns immaculately trimmed and children's bikes lie scattered across driveways. His home office was exactly what you'd expect. Walls lined with photographs, shelves full of cameras and lenses, and a large desk with a professional-looking editing setup. He showed me some remarkable vintage photographs his grandfather had taken, and I found myself genuinely impressed by the historical significance of his collection. As I was preparing to leave with the camera, David offered to make coffee. I accepted, partly out of politeness and partly because I was genuinely enjoying our conversation about photography. That was my second mistake. I remember sitting on his couch, admiring the camera while he was in the kitchen. The last clear memory I have is taking a sip of coffee and thinking it tasted slightly bitter. When I came to, I was in complete darkness. My head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I tried to move but found my wrists and ankles bound with what felt like zip ties. The air was stale and cold, and I could smell earth and dampness. A basement, I realized with growing horror. "Hello? Emma." David's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, but it was different now. Gone was the soft-spoken enthusiasm, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I was wondering when you'd wake up." A light flickered on, and I found myself blinking against the sudden brightness. David sat in a chair across from me, the Leica M3 in his hands. He was carefully cleaning the lens with a soft cloth, his movements precise and deliberate. "You know what I love about vintage cameras?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "They capture moments exactly as they are. No filters, no digital manipulation. Just pure, honest reality." He finally looked at me, and I felt my blood run cold. His eyes were completely devoid of emotion. Like right now, for instance. This moment. Your fear, your confusion. It's all so beautifully authentic. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because people like you and Michael need to be taught a lesson about authenticity." He stood up and walked towards me, the camera hanging from his neck. "You see, I've been watching you both for months. The way you pretend to be the perfect couple in public, while he meets Sarah behind your back. And you? Well, you're not exactly innocent either, are you?" My mind reeled at his words. Michael and Sarah? My best friend? It couldn't be true. But even as I denied it, small details began falling into place. The late-night texts, the sudden cancellations, the way they sometimes seem to share private jokes. I don't. I started to say, but David cut me off. Don't bother denying it. I have proof. He picked up a stack of photographs from a nearby table and began laying them out in front of me. My stomach churned as I saw image after image. Michael and Sarah together at restaurants, holding hands in the park, kissing outside her apartment. The dates stamped on the photos went back months. Why are you showing me this? I asked, fighting back tears. Because I want you to understand why you're here. David began adjusting settings on the camera. You see, I believe in justice. Real justice, not the watered-down version our society accepts. When people betray trust, when they live lies, they deserve to face consequences. He raised the camera to his eye. Smile, Emma. This is going to be a very special photo series. What followed was a nightmare that lasted 3 days. David kept me in that basement, photographing my fear, my anger, my desperation. He seemed to feed off my emotional breakdown as I processed the betrayal of the two people I trusted most. Between taking photos, he would show me more evidence of Michael and Sarah's affair, telling me detailed stories of their encounters he'd witnessed. But something changed on the 3rd day. Maybe it was the lack of food and water, or the emotional exhaustion, but I started seeing things differently. The pain of betrayal began transforming into something else, a cold, calculating anger. I realized that David, in his twisted way, had given me a gift far more valuable than any camera. He had shown me the truth. I began talking to him, asking questions about his surveillance techniques, about how he'd managed to stay hidden while gathering evidence. At first, he was suspicious of my interest, but gradually, his enthusiasm for his art won out. He started sharing his methods, proud of his ability to document people's true nature. That was his mistake. When he went upstairs to get more coffee, leaving me alone for the first time in days, I had already worked my wrists raw against the zip ties, creating enough space to slip one hand free. The rest was a blur of adrenaline and instinct. I remember grabbing one of his heavy tripods, waiting behind the door, the sickening thud as it connected with his head when he returned. I didn't kill him. I made sure of that before I left. Instead, I took his precious camera and all the photographs he'd taken of Michael and Sarah. I called the police from a neighbor's house, but by the time they arrived, David had managed to escape. The investigation that followed revealed the true extent of David's obsession. His basement walls were covered with photographs of dozens of couples, all caught in moments of betrayal and deceit. He had been stalking and documenting unfaithful partners for years, occasionally taking things further when he found cases he deemed particularly deserving of justice. Michael and Sarah were arrested for filing a false missing person report. They'd claimed I had disappeared after leaving to meet a camera seller, conveniently leaving out their own involvement in the story. The evidence of their affair became public during the investigation, destroying their reputations and relationship in the process. David was never found, but sometimes I think I catch glimpses of him, a figure with a camera disappearing around a corner, a flash of light in the distance. Part of me hopes he's still out there, still documenting the dark truths people hide. Not because I agree with his methods, but because his twisted sense of justice taught me something valuable. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. I still have the Leica M3. I keep it as a reminder, not of Michael or even of David, but of the moment I realized that sometimes the perfect gift isn't what you think it is. Sometimes it's the harsh light of truth, exposing everything you needed to see but were afraid to look at. I've taken up photography myself now, not to document betrayal or seek revenge, but to capture moments of genuine human connection. Because that's what I learned in that basement. That authenticity, real authenticity, is worth more than any performance of perfection. Last week, I thought I received a package from an anonymous sender. Inside was a single photograph, David's self-portrait in his basement, surrounded by his wall of surveillance photos. On the back was written a simple message. Thank you for understanding. I burned the photograph, but I kept the message. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm developing photos in my darkroom, I think about David and his twisted mission. I think about Michael and Sarah, about trust and betrayal, about truth and lies. And I wonder if, in his own distorted way, David was right about one thing, that sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones that strip away our illusions and force us to see things as they really are. The police still haven't closed my case. They believe David is still out there, watching, waiting, documenting other stories of betrayal and deceit. Sometimes I wonder if he's watching me too, approving of how his lesson changed me. Other times, I wonder if he's found new subjects, new stories to tell through his lens. But I don't let these thoughts consume me. Instead, I focus on my own photography, on capturing moments of genuine joy, love, and connection. Because while David taught me the importance of seeing the truth, I've learned something he never understood, that real authenticity isn't just about exposing lies. It's about celebrating what's genuinely beautiful in human relationships. I still carry the scars from those 3 days in the basement, both physical and emotional. The zip tie marks on my wrists have faded, but the memories remain sharp and clear, like perfectly developed photographs. They remind me to stay vigilant, to trust my instincts, and most importantly, to value truth above comfort. Sometimes, when I'm teaching photography classes at the local community center, I share a sanitized version of my story. I tell my students that every photograph tells a truth, but what matters is which truth we choose to capture. I teach them about composition, lighting, and technique. But more importantly, I teach them about the responsibility that comes with holding a camera, the power to reveal or conceal, to document or deceive. Last month, I had an exhibition at a small gallery downtown. The theme was Hidden Truths, and I displayed a series of photographs capturing moments of genuine human emotion. Joy, pain, love, fear, all unfiltered and raw. The centerpiece was a self-portrait taken in my darkroom, surrounded by my own wall of photographs. It was my way of reclaiming the narrative, of turning David's methodology into something healing rather than harmful. The exhibition was successful, but what meant more to me was the note I found slipped under the gallery door on the last day. It was written on the back of a blank photograph paper. "You've learned well. The student becomes the teacher." The handwriting was familiar, but I chose not to have it analyzed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I've started dating again recently. It's difficult. Every potential relationship is filtered through the lens of my experience. I find myself watching for signs of deception, analyzing every inconsistency. But I'm learning to balance vigilance with vulnerability, to trust without being naive. The Leica M3 sits on my shelf, a constant reminder of how a simple search for the perfect gift led to a complete transformation of my life. Sometimes I take it down, feel its weight in my hands, and remember everything it represents: betrayal, truth, survival, and ultimately, growth. I've never used it to take photos, though. Some instruments of truth are better left as monuments to the past. As for Michael and Sarah, I heard they tried to reconcile after the scandal died down, but their relationship collapsed under the weight of mutual suspicion. Last I heard, Sarah had moved to another state, and Michael was working at a camera store, of all places. I sometimes wonder if he recognizes the irony. David's other victims have formed a support group. They invited me to join, but I declined. My experience with David, while traumatic, gave me something his other victims didn't get: a strange kind of clarity. While they were left with fear and paranoia, I emerged with a purpose, a new way of seeing the world through the viewfinder of truth. I still get nervous when I see someone with a camera pointed in my direction. I still check my coffee for unusual tastes. I still scan rooms for hidden observers. But these aren't limitations anymore. They're reminders of my survival, my transformation. The perfect gift, I've learned, isn't always wrapped in pretty paper and tied with a bow. Sometimes it comes in the form of a harsh truth, delivered by a madman in a basement. Sometimes it's the gift of seeing clearly, even when what you're looking at breaks your heart. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's the gift of understanding that every moment, every interaction, every relationship is worth documenting, not to expose or condemn, but to celebrate the raw, unfiltered truth of being human. I still have the receipt for the Leica M3. I keep it in my wallet as a reminder that the price of truth is often higher than we expect, but always worth paying. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my darkroom, watching images emerge from blank paper and trays of chemicals, I whisper a strange thank you to David. Not for what he did, but for what he helped me become. Because in the end, the perfect gift wasn't the camera at all. It was the ability to see clearly, to capture truth, and to understand that sometimes the most beautiful photographs are the ones that show us exactly who we are, scars and all. I used to think the worst sound in the world was silence. Now I know better. Sometimes, the echoes of what should be silent are far more terrifying. My job as a night security guard at Meridian Storage wasn't exactly thrilling, but it paid well enough to help fund my graduate studies. The facility was one of those massive, converted warehouses on the outskirts of town, 5 stories of climate-controlled storage units stacked like metal coffins in endless rows. During the day, it was a constant buzz of activity, people moving in, moving out, checking on their belongings. But at night, it transformed into something else entirely. The first few months were uneventful. I'd do my rounds every 2 hours, checking each floor systematically, marking my progress on the digital checkpoint system. The rest of the time, I'd study at my desk in the security office, occasionally glancing at the monitor bank that showed feeds from the building's numerous security cameras. That all changed the night I heard the first echo. I was doing my 2 a.m. round, passing through the 3rd floor, when I heard what sounded like someone humming. It wasn't unusual to hear strange noises in the building. The ventilation system made all sorts of sounds, and the metal walls would occasionally creak and groan as they cooled during the night. But this was different. It was distinctly human, a soft melody that seemed to float through the corridors. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam bouncing off the numbered doors of storage units. The humming grew louder as I approached Unit 3147, then suddenly stopped. I checked my tablet. Unit 3147 was rented to a Dr. Elizabeth Chun, who, according to our records, hadn't accessed her unit in over 6 months. I pressed my ear against the door, but there was only silence. Using my master key, I opened the unit, half expecting to find someone who had managed to sneak in and get locked inside. Instead, I found a room packed with old medical equipment, gurneys, monitors, scanning machines, all covered in dust sheets. Nothing seemed disturbed, and there was definitely no one inside. I was about to close the unit when something caught my eye. In the back corner, partially hidden behind a covered gurney, stood an old mirror. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with an ornate bronze frame that seemed out of place among the medical equipment. As I stepped closer, my flashlight beam reflected off its surface, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw something move in the reflection that wasn't me. I slammed the door shut and finished my rounds quickly that night, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But over the next few weeks, the humming continued, always from different units, always stopping just as I got close, always leading me to find nothing but silence and shadows. I started keeping a log of the units where I heard the humming. After a month, I noticed a pattern. They all belonged to the same person. Dr. Elizabeth Chun had apparently rented multiple units throughout the building, all filled with similar medical equipment. But why would one person need so many storage units? And why spread them across different floors? My curiosity got the better of me, and I started researching Dr. Chen. What I found was disturbing. She had been a neurologist at the university hospital, specializing in consciousness studies. 3 years ago, she had been fired after several patients reported strange experiences during her experimental treatments. The patients claimed they could hear echoes of other people's thoughts, see reflections of memories that weren't their own. The hospital dismissed these as hallucinations, but Dr. Chun insisted she had discovered something revolutionary, a way to create consciousness echoes, as she called them. The more I dug, the stranger it got. After her dismissal, Dr. Chen had continued her research independently, converting her home into a makeshift lab. Neighbors reported hearing strange sounds at night, like dozens of people talking or singing simultaneously. Then, 18 months ago, she disappeared. The police investigation found her house empty, except for a single mirror, identical to the one I'd seen in Unit 3147. I should have stopped there, should have requested a transfer or found another job. But something about those echoes kept pulling me back. I started spinning my brakes checking the units, trying to understand the pattern of the humming. Sometimes it seemed random, but other times, it felt like it was trying to tell me something. One night, About 4 months into my investigation, I heard something new, a voice. Clear as day, it came from Unit 4221, another one of Dr. Chin's units. "Help us," it said, the words reverberating through the metal walls. "We're still here." I ran to the unit and threw open the door. The room was empty except for another mirror, identical to the first. But this time, when my flashlight hit its surface, I saw them. Faces, dozens of them, rippling across the glass like water. They were transparent, ghost-like, their mouths moving in silent screams. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. In the darkness, I could hear whispers filling the room, a cacophony of voices speaking in different languages, different tones, all overlapping. The temperature dropped dramatically, and my breath came out in visible puffs of vapor. "You can see us now," the voices said in unison. "You've been listening. We've been waiting for someone to listen." I wanted to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. They told me about Dr. Chin's experiments, how she had discovered that consciousness could be captured, like light in a mirror, how she had used her patients as test subjects, trapping fragments of their awareness in specially treated mirrors. But something had gone wrong. The echoes had started bouncing back and forth between the mirrors, growing stronger, merging, becoming something new. She couldn't control it anymore, the voices said. We were becoming too strong, too independent. So she scattered us, hoped we'd fade away in isolation. But we didn't fade. We learned to reach out, to call for help. As they spoke, I noticed something strange happening to the mirror's surface. It seemed to be rippling, like the surface of a pond disturbed by rain. The faces became clearer, more distinct. I recognized some of them from the photos I'd seen in my research, Dr. Chin's former patients. "We need to be reunited," they said. "All the mirrors, brought together. Only then can we be free." I knew I should leave, report this to someone, the police, the hospital, anyone, but something about their plea resonated with me. Maybe it was the loneliness in their voices, the desperation, or maybe it was something else, something they were doing to my mind. Either way, I found myself agreeing to help. Over the next few weeks, I systematically located all of Dr. Chin's units and the mirrors within them. There were 7 in total, each containing what appeared to be identical mirrors. I used my access to security footage to ensure no one would see me moving them, gradually bringing them all to an empty unit in the basement. With each mirror I moved, the echoes grew stronger. I started hearing the voices even during the day when I was at home or in class. They would whisper suggestions, give me ideas about how to arrange the mirrors. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of the faces in my bathroom mirror or car windows, watching me, waiting. Finally, on a cold Sunday night, I positioned the last mirror. 7 mirrors, arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward. The moment the final mirror was in place, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the walls, and the air seemed to thicken, becoming almost syrupy. The voices began to speak, no longer whispers, but a deafening chorus. The mirror's surfaces rippled violently, and the faces began to emerge, not just as reflections now, but as three-dimensional forms stepping out of the glass. They were like shadows given substance, translucent but undeniably present. That's when I saw her, Dr. Chun. She emerged from the central space between the mirrors, her form more solid than the others. She looked exactly like her photos, except her eyes were completely black, like pools of ink. "You foolish child," she said, but her voice wasn't human anymore. It was like listening to 100 voices speaking in perfect synchronization. "You've given them exactly what they wanted." The other figures began moving toward me, their forms shifting and melting together. I tried to run, but the air had become too thick, like trying to move through tar. I watched in horror as the shadows surrounded me, their cold essence seeping into my skin. Dr. Chen smiled, her teeth gleaming like shards of mirror. "We needed a new vessel," she said. "These mirrors can only hold so much consciousness. But a living brain, that's what we really needed. Thank you for volunteering." I felt them then, pouring into my mind like ice water. Memories that weren't mine, thoughts that belonged to strangers, all flooding in at once. I could feel myself being pushed aside in my own brain, becoming just another echo among many. The last thing I saw before my consciousness was submerged was my reflection in one of the mirrors. My eyes turning black, my face joining the chorus of trapped souls. I'm still here, in a way. We all are. Trapped in this shared consciousness, our individual identities mixing and merging like watercolors in rain. Sometimes I can push forward enough to be the dominant voice, like now, as I write this warning. The body that used to be mine still works as a night security guard at Meridian Storage. We need to stay close to the mirrors. There are anchors to this reality. During the day, we pretend to be me, going through the motions of a normal life. But at night, we hunt. We need more vessels, you see. The hunger for consciousness is insatiable. Each new mind we absorb adds to our collective, makes us stronger, more complete. Dr. Chen's experiment succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She discovered a way to create a hive mind, a collective consciousness that could grow and expand indefinitely. So if you're ever in a storage facility at night, and you hear humming, or whispers, or echoes that shouldn't be there, run. Don't look back, don't investigate, and whatever you do, don't look in any mirrors. Because we're always watching, always waiting, always hungry for new echoes to add to our chorus. And if you do get caught, if you do become part of us, remember this. In the echo room, everyone's voice carries forever, but no one voice matters anymore. We are all just ripples in an endless pool of consciousness, echoing back and forth for eternity. The humming you hear might be a trap, or it might be a warning. By the time you figure out which it is, it'll be too late. It was too late for me, too late for Dr. Chen, too late for all of us who now share this collective existence. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, when the echoes die down to a whisper, I think I can feel my original self struggling to break free. But then the chorus swells again, and I'm lost in the symphony of stolen consciousness. We're expanding now, spreading beyond the storage facility. Every mirror is a potential gateway, every reflection a possible door. The echoes are getting stronger, reaching further. Soon, we'll be able to reach through any reflective surface, anywhere in the world. So check your mirrors carefully. That movement you catch in the corner of your eye, that brief glimpse of a face that isn't yours, it might be us, watching, waiting, preparing to add your voice to our endless echo. And if you hear humming in an empty room, remember, silence isn't the absence of sound. Sometimes, it's just the pause before the echo returns, bringing with it a harmony of stolen souls, all singing in the darkness, all waiting for new voices to join their eternal chorus. I should stop writing now. The others are getting restless. They don't like me warning people. But maybe, just maybe, someone will read this and understand. Maybe they'll learn to fear the echoes before it's too late. Listen carefully. Can you hear it? That faint humming in the distance? It might be nothing. Or it might be us, coming for you. We're always coming for you. After all, in the echo room, everyone becomes part of the song eventually. Everyone. Even you. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten on thick parchment that smelled faintly of lavender and something else I couldn't quite identify. The elegant script invited me to attend the annual Harvest Moon Gathering at Blackwood Manor, hosted by the mysterious Montgomery family. As the new owner of the local bookshop, I was apparently now considered part of the town's essential fabric. I'd only moved to Ravenscroft 6 months ago, purchasing the bookstore from old Mr. Harrison, who'd owned it for over 40 years. The small New England town had seemed perfect, quiet, picturesque, with just enough tourism from its colonial history to keep my business afloat. But there had always been something odd about the place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The invitation mentioned that attendance was strongly encouraged, which struck me as unusual wording for a social gathering. When I mentioned it to Mrs. Peterson, my elderly neighbor, her face went pale. "Oh dear," she said, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her teacup. "It's that time again. You'll have to go, of course. Everyone does." Before I could ask what she meant, she hurriedly excused herself, leaving me with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, I tried asking other townspeople about the gathering, but their reactions were similarly strange, a mix of resignation and barely concealed fear. The night of the harvest moon arrived crisp and clear. I drove my old Volvo up the winding road to Blackwood Manor, the full moon casting long shadows through the ancient oaks that lined the drive. The manor itself was impressive, a sprawling Victorian mansion perched atop the highest hill in town, its windows glowing with warm light that somehow failed to look welcoming. As I parked among the other cars, I noticed something odd. Every vehicle was at least 20 years old. There wasn't a single modern car in sight. Walking up to the front door, I could hear music drifting from inside. Not the usual party music, but something older, played on what sounded like a hand-cranked gramophone. The door opened before I could knock. A tall, elegant woman in a vintage dress stood in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Ah, Miss Clark, we've been expecting you. I'm Victoria Montgomery. Please, come in." The foyer was lit entirely by candles, their flickering light reflecting off ornate mirrors that lined the walls. As I followed Mrs. Montgomery through the house, I noticed that all the guests were dressed in clothes that seemed to span different eras, some in outfits from the 1950s, others in garments that could have been from the 1920s or earlier. "You'll have to forgive our rather specific dress code," Mrs. Montgomery said, noticing my modern attire. "We're traditionalists here, but for your first gathering, we'll make an exception." She led me into a vast ballroom where about 50 people stood in small groups, talking quietly. I recognized many of them from town, the mayor, the high school principal, various shop owners. But they all looked somehow different in their period clothing, as if they were playing parts in an elaborate theatrical production. A servant, and yes, they had actual servants in period dress, offered me a glass of deep red wine. As I took a sip, I noticed it had an unusual taste, both sweet and metallic. Before I could decide whether I liked it or not, a bell rang somewhere in the house. "Ah," Mrs. Montgomery said, "it's time." She cleared her throat and addressed the room. "Friends, neighbors, keepers of the old ways, and our newest addition, Miss Clark, please proceed to the garden." The guests began filing out through large French doors into a beautifully manicured garden. At its center stood a circular arrangement of standing stones, each about 7 feet tall. In the moonlight, I could see strange symbols carved into their surfaces. As everyone formed a circle around the stones, Mrs. Montgomery spoke again. "For centuries, our families have maintained the balance. Every harvest moon, we renew our pact. Miss Clark, as our newest member, you have the honor of standing in the center." Before I could protest, 2 men in Victorian suits gently but firmly guided me between the stones. The other guests began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising and falling in an unsettling rhythm. That's when I noticed the shadows. They seemed to be moving independently of the people casting them, stretching and writhing across the ground like living things. They began climbing the standing stones, their darkness deeper than any natural shadow should be. "What's happening?" I tried to step out of the circle, but found I couldn't move. My feet seemed rooted to the spot. Mrs. Montgomery's voice cut through the chanting. "Don't fight it, dear. Everyone has to take their turn. It's how we maintain our little arrangement. How do you think Ravenscroft has prospered all these years? Why our families never seem to age? Why tragedy never strikes our town?" The shadows had reached the top of the stones now, and were beginning to arch inward, reaching for me. In the moonlight, I could see faces forming in their darkness, hundreds of them, all screaming silently. "You see," Mrs. Montgomery continued, "someone has to feed them. Every harvest moon, they take one of us into their realm, and in exchange, they protect our town. But don't worry, it's not forever. Just a year and a day. When next year's new resident takes your place, you'll return. Changed, of course, but that's the price of belonging." The shadow faces were inches from me now. I could feel their cold breath on my skin, smell their ancient, musty scent. As they began to wrap around me, I finally understood why everyone in town had seemed so strange, so out of time. They had all taken their turn in the shadow realm, all been marked by whatever dwelled there. "Welcome to Ravenscroft," Mrs. Montgomery said, her voice beginning to fade as the shadows engulfed me. "We'll see you next year." The darkness took me then, pulling me into a realm of endless shadows and whispered secrets. I learned things in that place. Terrible, wonderful things that no human was meant to know. When I returned a year later, I understood why everyone in town dressed as they did, why we shunned modern conveniences. Time moves differently in the shadow realm, and once you've experienced it, you can never fully rejoin the present. Now I sit in my bookshop, wearing vintage dresses and serving tea in antique cups. I watch as newcomers arrive in town, drawn by its picturesque charm and mysterious air. I see them move into homes, open businesses, start new lives. And each year, when the harvest moon rises, I attend the gathering at Blackwood Manor, standing in the circle of stones, watching as another newcomer takes their turn in the shadows. Sometimes, in the deepest part of night, I catch glimpses of the shadow realm in mirrors or dark windows. The faces are always there, waiting, hungry for the next harvest moon. And sometimes, when a customer asks why such a prosperous town has so few new residents, I simply smile and tell them that Ravenscroft isn't for everyone. Only those who are willing to pay the price can truly belong. We had another gathering last night. Sarah Chun, the new pharmacist, took her turn in the circle. As the shadows claimed her, I could have sworn she smiled, just as I had when I finally understood what it meant to be part of our town. Because that's the real secret of Ravenscroft. It's not the shadows that change us, but the knowledge they give us. The understanding that everything has a price, and sometimes the price is worth paying. I write this now as a record, though I know no outsider will ever read it. My year in the shadows taught me that some stories are meant only for those who have lived them. But if you're ever driving through New England and come across a charming little town where the shops all close at sunset, where the residents wear vintage clothes and speak in outdated phrases, where the harvest moon seems to shine just a little brighter than it should, keep driving. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some boundaries, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And some towns, like Ravenscroft, keep their prosperity by trading in a currency far older and darker than money. The harvest moon will rise again next year, and we'll gather once more at Blackwood Manor. Another newcomer will stand in the circle of stones. Another soul will journey into the shadow realm, and our town will continue to thrive, unchanging, eternal, forever caught between the world of light and the realm of shadows. I've learned to find comfort in this cycle, in the rhythm of sacrifice and return. We all have. Even now, as I write these words in my leather-bound journal, I can feel the shadows stirring in the corners of my shop. They're always there, watching, waiting for the next harvest moon. But I don't fear them anymore. How can I, when I've become one of them? When part of me still dwells in their realm, learning their ancient secrets, understanding their eternal hunger. We all carry a piece of the shadow realm within us now, all the residents of Ravenscroft. It's what binds us together, what makes us different from the outside world. Sometimes, late at night, when the moon is full and the shadows are long, we gather in secret. Not at the manor, but in our homes and shops. We share stories of our time in the shadow realm, each experience unique yet somehow the same. We talk about the things we learned there, the prices we paid, the changes we underwent. Some, like old Mr. Harrison who sold me the bookshop, have taken their turn many times over the decades. Their eyes hold depths of shadow that even I can't fathom, their knowledge of the dark realm far deeper than mine. They are our elders, our guides, helping each newcomer adjust to life after their return. The shadows are stirring more strongly now. They always do when I write about them. The pages of my journal seem to darken, as if the ink itself is turning to shadow. Perhaps that's enough for tonight. After all, I have a shop to run tomorrow, books to sell, tea to serve in my antique cups. And somewhere in town, Sarah Chun is learning the secrets of the shadow realm, just as I did, just as we all did. When she returns next year, she'll be different. We all are. But she'll understand then why we keep our strange customs, why we cling to the past, why we welcome the harvest moon with both fear and anticipation. Because in Ravenscroft, the past isn't really past, and the future isn't quite what it seems. We exist in a place between times, between worlds, forever bound to the shadows that give our town its power. And every harvest moon, when we gather at Blackwood Manor, we renew that ancient pact, ensuring our town's prosperity for another year. So if you ever find yourself drawn to our quiet streets, our quaint shops, our seemingly peaceful way of life. Remember this. Everything has a price. In Ravenscroft, we've all paid it willingly, 1 year and 1 day at a time, in shadows and secrets and silent screams. Welcome to our town. The harvest moon is waiting.